Yeah.
Well, good morning. Mark, are we good to go? Okay. So as we begin, typically we be open in prayer, and I'd like to go ahead and do that this morning. I've asked Sandy Levi if she would open us in prayer, and we'll do the pledge.
Lord Jesus, we thank you for who you are, and we love you this morning. We thank you for another opportunity to serve, to grow, and to impact the lives of other people. Lord, we thank you for the awesome privilege that you have given each one of us to serve you and to serve in the public in a way that others are watching us. And Lord, may our testimony be worthy of your name. I pray that you be with us in our meeting today. I pray that you would guide us with your spirit. You would help us to remember what it is we do and why we do it, and that we would look to you for the guidance and the strength that only you give. We thank you for this wonderful city that you have given to us, Lord, and help us to preserve it, to stand strong, and to keep the quality of life and the charm and the uniqueness that we have enjoyed. We pray for your blessing and your hand upon not only our lives as we make decisions, but on those of whom we serve, our businesses, our hospitals, our schools, and we just ask all these things in your Son's most precious name. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Sandy. As we get started, before we do roll call, I just want to just give mention to the tragedy that happened in Kentucky over the weekend. You know, Friday afternoon, we ended our day working on our emergency preparedness over at the police station with our team. And, you know, I'm so thankful we don't have to worry about tornadoes typically or hurricanes. And for those, that was such a tragic incident, so that was uncommon at that level. But I think about the lives that were changed, and I know that you guys, our council, I'm sure like Jim and I have been praying for them, because that's just an incredibly difficult thing. So I just wanted to give acknowledgement to that and just encourage us all to be praying for them. Okay, let's go with roll call.
Rodriguez? Here. Bruner?
Here.
Mucci?
Here.
Bauer? Here. Haverfield?
Here.
And Levi.
Present.
As we get started, I would like to take action item 1.9 and pull it to the front so that Ron doesn't have to sit here for the next hour plus. So action item 1.9 on the agenda is an action item. This is the council approval and authorization for the mayor to sign the fire district MOU for fire plan review and inspection services. Good morning.
Basically allow us to keep doing business as we have been. We'll keep doing our plan review and inspections for best service to the citizens. And then it also allows for the building department to collect our fees and pass them through to us. So the benefit of this is to the customer, they won't see any changes, and we'll all keep doing what we're doing.
Keep getting the work done.
Yeah.
And we appreciate your work doing that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Would there be a motion to approve the MOU?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion or questions? Hearing none, roll call.
Rodriguez?
Yes.
Bruner?
Yes.
Levi?
Yes.
Mucci?
Yes.
And Haverfield.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Rick, were you able to ask Jamie if she was able to come? She wasn't there, so I don't know where she went. Okay. Okay, perfect. Well, Robin, if you would like to, I told Cliff it would be a little later, but since you're presenting, if you would like to go ahead and skip down, what I'm thinking, rather than having staff sitting here, if you don't mind, we'll go ahead and get through a couple of the staff items. This particular item is just a discussion, and it's related to the incentives for economic development infrastructure. And it's just making sure that we all have a good understanding of why we do incentives and where the funding is coming from.
All right. Well, good morning, Monday morning, bright and early. We talked about just going over incentives as part of your roles and responsibility. And then we have some new people who are participating and then as a review. So as you know, governments can offer financial and non-financial incentives to private companies who are looking to locate in an area. And so the state of Idaho and the county do offer incentives. One of the most effective ways to bring in companies and to have an effective strategy at business attraction is to have a toolkit. And part of that toolkit is an incentive. Are incentives all around the world. Most people offer incentives to come to bring for private investment. So in the state of Idaho and in the county, we do have incentives, and they are performance-based, and they are tied to specific outcomes that are agreed upon with the private company. So for example, if a company wants to come, they work with the state of Idaho on certain incentive, and then in the agreement, it said that they have to create a certain amount of jobs or have capital investment that comes in. And once those outcomes are met, then they can be reimbursed. We do not do money up front like many other states like Texas and Ohio. They do money up front without having to have any sort of outcome. So that's not something we do here in Idaho. Incentives are based on a but-for idea. So but for this incentive, the company would not come. And so the incentive is really there to incentivize coming to a locality. And incentives are in place to help bring companies to increase tax revenue base and to bring good paying jobs. And then also incentives are available to, sorry, we went one slide too many. Incentives are available for existing businesses as well. So as they expand, businesses that are local can apply for certain incentives at the state and then have those reimbursements made as they meet their outcomes. So most importantly, incentives increase our ability in the competitive process. So when RFIs or requests for information come in from the state of Idaho or BVEP, usually who we're competing against is Salt Lake City, Phoenix, and Reno. So those are our regional competitors who have similar incentives available to us, available as ours, but some of them are more aggressive. Locally, as many of you know, we are competing with Caldwell many times for not only industrial users, but in the downtown development as well. Caldwell has committed to expediting all industrial permits in 10 days. That's a really quick turnaround. But as many of you know, for a company, time is money. And so they've committed to that. So we are in a competitive nature with regional and also our neighbors. So in the past couple years, we had, before COVID, we were able to recruit upon our low cost of business. And one of those pieces was the cost of land was low. But as you've seen with the residential pressure on our industrial land as well, the price of land has gone up. And so we do not have that in our toolkit right now, is that, oh, we have this low cost of land. In fact, I just heard from a site selector about 2 months ago, his jaw dropped. They've done projects here at the price of land when I told them the price per square foot. So it's definitely something we're bumping up against. Also, incentive create a cost-benefit structure to putting in infrastructure when there is public participation, that there is an ROI. So when the public funds come in as well as the private infrastructure, it makes it have an ROI. Otherwise, it's too expensive. As you know, you've seen construction costs as it comes through the city. It's very, very expensive to put in the water and the sewer and the power. So NAMPA has focused on manufacturing, which has been incredibly helpful in times of recession. Many of the companies in that North Nampa area received incentives. Our food processors out in that area, they are the ones in our last recession that expanded during the recession. They are the only ones that didn't shrink and lose jobs. And so Lactalis during the last recession expanded and had a incentive during that process. I think that was in 2011. So here's some examples of companies that have received incentives in the last couple of years. So Matern, Go-Go Squeeze, Audible, Heartland RV, and then Lactalis, as I just stated. So with that, I do have a handout on our incentives, and I'll stand for any questions.
You first.
Mayor, I'll just thank you, Robin, for all you do as far as helping us with the Nampa Development Corporation. And obviously, as it carries over into city issues and decisions need to be ratified that are made at that level and brought up. So it's been a joy to work with Robin. And with the currently, we're working with one major company coming in, Custom, that we hope to be able to make an announcement on pretty soon. So
Yes.
you know when that might be yet?
I got an update from Adler Industries that I should be able to say something this week.
Oh,
So
good.
that's a good example, Commissioner Haverfield, of the company that's coming. The increased cost for power out in that area was initially at about $1 million, and it's gone to $3.8 million from June till today. So just really incredible increase in costs, and NDC's participated in helping get the infrastructure out there in North Nampa.
That's wonderful. And the incentive that we approved recently was about $300,000 from the state. I think you've said there may be an opportunity for another incentive. And that's small, it's not huge, but when you look at the percentage that it's paying, the private sector has a massive investment. This is not an easy place to invest anymore, as you just said, which the climate's changed a little bit. Especially in this case, I wouldn't have guessed on the power that they would have had to invest that much just to get power to their facility.
Yes.
So, Councilman Bruner?
Robin, thanks so much for all you do. Hey, two questions. First one, and I'll just go ahead and announce both of them, then you can answer both of them.
Okay.
You mentioned existing businesses can apply for incentives, so I'd like for you to give an example of that. Second question, if you can just, if there is anyone listening at 7:45, but kind of explain the Karcher Mall as another example and
Sure.
what that is, what has to happen for that investment to receive the incentive. So just a couple examples. That's helpful to me and maybe helpful to others.
Sure.
Thanks.
So Commissioner Bruner and Mayor, for existing businesses, when they look at an expanding, so Matern Go Squeeze did this. So they did an expansion. They've been working on an expansion. And with that expansion, they create jobs. So they've received an incentive as they, with a tax reimbursement incentive, as they create those jobs and we get the payroll and the proof to show that, then they can get the new incentive as they've increased.
And let me just, if I may, Mayor, just add on. So is there an example of a small business where they expand, like a local, not a national business, but just where they can they receive any type of, because I think that's what the public hears out there, where you bring, you incentivize, which I love the way we don't do it on the front end, but incentivize all these businesses to come in, but then they compete with local owners and businesses. So is there any incentive for the guy that's already been here for 10, 15 years?
Yeah, so there's a good example of this when we did the small business grant. And so that is a grant to help them when they were walking through COVID. So that is an incentive. Also, we do non-financial incentives, which are really important. We do workforce training incentives that help small businesses as they're trying to walk through getting skilled labor coming in. And also, one example, this is with a larger company, but this is a non-financial incentive as well, is that we go to Lactalis' their job fair, and we talk about here's all the things that are available in Nampa, helping them to walk through getting, again, skilled labor and recruiting. So there are some things. The state's incentives are targeted more at larger industry because that increases the tax revenue and brings more jobs. So.
Then Karcher, you just give that, I'm sorry.
Yes. So some of you probably don't know, with NDC, we did a reimbursement agreement with Karcher Mall, so the developer out there who did the demolition of Karcher Mall and then is redeveloping some of the site pads and then the main structure, as well as putting apartments in behind Karcher Mall. So NDC is participating in a reimbursement model as the developer meets certain earmarks, which would be the demolition and then building of the apartments. The NDC helped with the costs of the infrastructure that's getting put in there. And so that's part of what we did with NDC to help incentivize that project. Another great example of how expensive that project, from the time that we approved it in the end of 2019 at NDC until today, they've increased in $11 million in costs. So it's quite a much larger project. So they have their building permits, and I am supposed to hear from the developer when we are doing a groundbreaking. So it should be, he thought this month, but I'm guessing we're looking at January now since I haven't heard that yet.
Mayor.
We've got Councilwoman Munchie. Then we'll go to you.
Yes.
We had that really exciting presentation by Ed McMahon last week on
Yes.
Main Street and economic development. Can you explain a little bit how you envision economic development working? There were a lot of incentives brought up in that presentation to really revitalize a downtown, and I thought the focus on small business and the return on investment was really remarkable, and seeing those hard data
Yes.
to support that. Can you kind of can you expand on maybe what you see as incentives in that type of particular area where our economic development team might link arms with Main Street?
Yeah, Councilwoman Munchie, that was a fantastic presentation. It brought to light, and I know many of you were there, why downtown development is critical for a city. And we've been working hard on that for the last few years, as you guys have seen. We have worked with NDC. The downtown is part of the Urban Renewal District, and the Urban Renewal District has started focusing more on the downtown, and we have an exciting project that's coming at our next NDC meeting. We've met with the developer 3 times to talk about an apartment building going in on the parking lot on 12th and 3rd across from the parking garage. And so how critical it is to have urban renewal downtown. Urban living downtown. And so they'll partner with Urban Renewal to be able to have that next project happen. And I brought up our competition in Caldwell. So we saw that Caldwell came out with, they're going to have a mixed-use building just like we hope to have with this NDC project. So those are important elements as we begin. Also, our infrastructure is going to be critical to get that, the repairs of the sidewalks keep moving. All of our sidewalks are very old in the downtown and need a lot of repair. As I talked about, they're so expensive to get repaired. So we need to look at our infrastructure in downtown. And when we open up the sidewalks, then we're looking at, what pipes are in the ground, and oftentimes they're very, very old. And so we have a lot of things that Ed talked about, incentivizing. We had a great dinner meeting on Wednesday night with the BID board meetings and the Downtown Nampa Association board, so the Main Street board, talking about how we're going to move forward and really make a plan, a strategy to be able to tackle downtown and look at the timeline and what we need to do to be able to make our downtown be a vibrant, wonderful place and help really those vacant buildings. Was a lot of the discussion about how we can help our building owners fill those buildings.
And if I could, I got an email from Kevin Daniels over the weekend, and he mentioned some ideas which follow right along this. He said the city could incentivize downtown housing by packaging and expediting permits because it sends a message to our investors, time is money. The other thing he suggested was we could appoint a single reviewer, right, to expedite things downtown. We could also incentivize and possibly waive some building permit fees on second floor residential. Because what we really want is retail downstairs. We need the downtown living on the second floor. And so there are a number of things, and I told him I'll send this over to your office. And so that we can have discussions, because some of those are very easy, that don't cost anything, but they're incentives. And those are the things that we need to be looking at as we revitalize downtown. So, yeah, good job. Councilman Haverfield.
Thank you. And as a follow-up to what's going on with the 3rd and 12th corner, again, that all became possible because of a land swap with the city, with the fire department's parking area now by Fire Station Number 1, be able to get that property and then be able to put out an RFP and move down the process. And now we do actually do have a mixed-use concept with lower, main level retail, won't say who, and then upper level housing. But I was going to also, for the council and new council, if you could share a little bit how the Mercy Housing Project, how successful that was by virtue of, again, the performance base, but they partnered with the federal government as far as for additional dollars, but it's for housing as well. Can you share that? Because I think that's truly a shining example of how urban renewal can be used.
I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank with the emergency housing. Which one are you
Oh,
talking
no,
about?
I'm talking about Mercy Housing
Oh, okay.
on 16th Street.
Yeah, so I didn't get to be involved with that project because it was pre-me, so I think you might be able to give more better.
Okay, then I'll direct it back to myself. and
Sorry.
share. Again, that's an urban renewal area that was defined just for one city block and for a little piece of property going to the west to be able to tie into the infrastructure for, sizing up the utilities that were there. But originally it was meant to maintain the facade of the old Mercy housing or hospital for, just for long-term renovation purposes, but the building burned down. So what was a $350,000 stipulated amount that we would participate as Napa Development Corporation ended up being a $240,000 contribution back, but it's all tax reimbursement model. So we've, to date, that urban renewal obviously is, we're no longer active, but we've put, I think, about $40,000 back to the developer, and we still owe about $200,000. As the taxes roll in, they get that reimbursement back. So, but it's created a housing entity that wasn't there on that. It was just a blighted piece of property, and now it's a nice example of how urban renewal can partner in that relationship. So I think it was very successful.
Yeah, that's good. So for sake of time, we'll keep moving, but I think it's important for council to truly understand when we're voting on an incentive, what we're voting on and the impact that it makes. And so I just wanted to make sure that we all understood that. And are there any questions for Robin before we move on?
Yes, Mayor.
Yes.
I just wanted to ask Robin, you mentioned that Caldwell has committed to a 10-day turnaround time for industrial permits. What is Nampa's time frame?
So, Councilwoman Levi, I believe we're at 20 days. So we commit to 20 days.
Is that a building permit review?
When we do an expedited building permit review process, so we commit to 20 days. Now, I should give the caveat that all of you know that building department has been understaffed for quite a long time, and so that's part of that. But Patrick has done an amazing job at just getting on the phone with a developer and helping them walk through the process. So, but Caldwell on the outside, like they say on their website, they have a 10-day review process. So,
Follow-up, please.
Yes.
So do they have a dedicated staff member for that purpose?
yes, they do.
So we did that when we had Amazon coming in. We expedited, we made sure that we were supporting their timeline, but we don't have that across the board, and that's a discussion that we'll be having with Cliff as he oversees really the development side between planning and zoning and building department and economic development, how we can better serve those projects, because time is money and it's important. So it is an area of focus.
Mayor,
So, yeah.
again, that's a part of that concierge approach that we've talked about, but the reality behind it is there's so many layers that we have to go through as far as for plan submission, as far as through design review in some cases, planning and zoning for allowable use on the property, and then you get to the point where you actually get to a building permit review. There's no way in the world they would turn around a building permit in 10 days. That's a promise I don't think is realistic, because they can always fluff it on either end with, oh, well, you forgot about this. And it's just, sometimes these projects are way too technical, and there's not a plans examiner capable of an analysis that quickly. But, you know, if they're making the promise, I'm going to make them deliver, because we've got some projects going in over in Caldwell right now as well. So I need the name of the person that I need to reach out to.
Okay, sounds great.
All righty. Robin?
I'm sorry.
Give Natalie one of these.
Oh, sorry, Natalie. I apologize.
Sorry, Natalie. Darrell, thank you. Thank you, Robin.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Robin.
Appreciate it. You know, since Jamie's in the room, Todd, what we're getting into with Todd, we need a good chunk of time, and we will get right there, and I appreciate it. Hopefully, this will be really fast. We're going to move to action. This is an action item. It's 1-4 on the agenda. This is a discussion and authorization to sign a resolution updating the paid, well, actually, there's two here. The first one is the paid holiday schedule in the City of Nampa Employee Handbook. I'm hoping that you all had an opportunity to review that. I didn't get any phone calls. I don't know if Jamie did, because I was hoping we could reach out before this morning. This is adding Juneteenth. Juneteenth is a federal holiday that has been introduced. And as I have sent to each of the council members, the City of Boise, the City of Meridian, the State of Idaho, and Canyon County, we didn't go beyond that. Went ahead and adopted it. We have not, but as we're moving into our next calendar year, it's important that we address this. We have been asked the question. Had a meeting this last week with our senior leaders, and out of that discussion, a suggestion came, and that was that we apply Juneteenth to December 24th as a holiday. We do that with Columbus Day in October. With Columbus Day, we take off the Friday after Thanksgiving. And we use it specifically for that holiday so that the employees have a 4-day weekend. One of the things that we've struggled with is Christmas Eve and what time people leave, and it's last minute, and having a couple of hours. And I think by using this as a holiday that we could dedicate the 24th as a holiday for our employees, it would give them a 4-day weekend over Christmas weekend. That's just a thought, and so I'd like to put that out as we get started and see if there are any questions for Jamie on this particular issue.
And that also mirrors what Nampa Fire District will be doing as well.
Using it
Yes.
as a holiday on that day?
Yeah.
So Mayor, what are our action items? I'm seeing two as far as in the memo, and then I'm not seeing the Juneteenth. Is that also a third action item?
That's 1-4. It's the federal holiday.
I just
I'm
brought
sorry.
up 1-4, but I'm not seeing the action statement on.
You know, I don't know that there was an action statement. We just put the time sheet in there. So the action would be to authorize the updating of the paid holiday.
And so Mayor, I will so move that there's two items that I'm seeing in the memo. Is that what you're wanting to have happen? So I guess I will just read those. They're brief. One, amend last paragraph in 6.8 paid personnel leave policy to reflect retiree use of PL when extending their last day with the city will not exceed 30 calendar days. Personal leave will not continue to accrue during this time. See resolution and attached revision. And number two, request city council consider adding a paid holiday, which I will also include that Juneteenth transition to Christmas Eve, changing our benefits from 10 to 11 paid days per year.
And that is action item 1.4 and 1.5 that we would do at the same time under one motion. I just pulled it up if anyone needs to see the reference. Okay.
I'll second
Is-
that, Mayor.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, roll call.
Mucci?
Yes.
Bauer? No. Haverfield?
We have a motion and a second, but you've called for the vote. so
I'm sorry.
That's all right. I was just going to say, we usually use Veterans Day as the day after Thanksgiving, as that filler opportunity. So we get in a full work week and then we use that day elsewhere. So again, we're talking about a brand-new holiday for our employees. I don't think we'll be doing this as far as a private business, but I think I understand the rationale behind it. We're being pressured because there's others that are moving down this path. But as a private business owner, I won't be doing this. But as a city, I understand the reasoning, so I'll vote yes.
Levi?
Yes.
Rodriguez?
Yes.
And Bruner?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Jamie.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Todd, you are on. So let's move to action item. And do you want to present from the front today? Do you mind?
Happy to do that, Mayor. I was going to ask that question.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. It's not a big deal. Yeah, and you won't need to because you're all going off, yeah. I think we all have a handout. Is that correct that you've provided to us?
Mayor, yes, I did give you a copy of my slides.
Thank you.
And Rick is going to help me run through those as far as the cues go when we move through it. And Mayor and council members, as we cover these things, I'd certainly like to, Mayor, you're leading the meeting, but keep it free flow. If you have questions, comments, or whatever as we're going through things, I may ask for your thoughts on things as we go through it. Mayor, is there a particular time frame we're shooting for to be done here, or?
You know, originally we said from 7:30 till 9.
Okay.
And so I think our other, if we need to put off something, we could, like procurement, if we need to push that one off. Discussion of council liaison assignments will be short. So I think you've got a good amount of time.
Thank you, Mark.
We do need to go through the next items of 1, 2, and 3.
I think we'll be okay. I tried to consolidate some of this down a little bit, so. Well, next, okay, there you go, Rick, you're on this slide. Council members, just when I do PowerPoints, after being in the military for 20 years, we have a thing called death by PowerPoint. And I'd suffered a few of those deaths, so I try to make the slides a little more open, keep a little bit of a sense of humor in them, but not have them, little bits of white space with lots of text and acronyms. So just kind of a warning, you'll see a little bit of my sense of humor as we go through these. So I'm going to cover today the relationship between mayor and council, and we'll kind of talk about that and how that works and your respective roles and responsibilities there with some specifics. We'll cover some open meeting law issues, hearing issues, and public records issues, and a little bit of ethics in government, and then procurement toward the end. But as I said, please ask questions as we go along. So next slide. So the best way, I think, to just describe it generally, as far as the role of mayor and council, is the executive branch and the legislative branch. I guess you can see a little bit of my preference politically, some of my mentors from the past that are there. But the mayor functions as the executive branch, and the council functions as the legislative branch. One deals more with the day-to-day operations within the policy and the law that's been set by the state and by the city council, so that's the mayor's role. And then the legislative branch, as the council, passes the laws, passes the broader policies, and the budget and the taxation issues that mayor and staff operate within. The AIC, I didn't bring it up with me, but they have a really good manual on the roles and responsibilities, and we can get you all a copy of that if you haven't seen it already. That's an updated version from 2021. One thing to keep in mind is that Idaho is what we call a Dillon state, which means cities are a creation of state statute, not a creation of the Constitution. So the state statute defines the roles, the responsibilities, the powers, and the abilities of a city. And that power is derived and interpreted under state law, and it's the power that's necessarily and fairly implied from the grant of authority that's contained in the statute. Okay, next slide. So again, talking broadly here, we have a system of checks and balances. You learn about that, right, in your government classes. You have different branches of government, and each have their powers and responsibilities, and it's, I think, a system that our founding fathers put in place for a good reason. It's good not to have just a city council managing the city. It's hard to govern on a day-to-day basis by committee, but it's also good not to just have a mayor that runs the entire city and sets policy, because as a council, you represent a broader constituency. And you bring those different perspectives to the table. You have a larger debate about the issues. I'm just talking about some of the benefits. As I said, as a council, you represent a broader group and constituency. As a mayor, narrower but more of an ability to be responsive on a quick time frame, to deal with issues decisively within the policies that have been set. So you each exist independently, but you can't really function effectively without working together cooperatively and as a team. The most effective city councils or county commissions or urban renewal boards that I've seen work cooperatively as a team to really be effective and operate in the best interest of the community. So one group doesn't run over or around the other. So next slide. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about some of the specifics of the mayor's role. And these are covered in Title 50, Chapter 6. And the main statute section is 5206, which lays out a lot of these roles and responsibilities of the mayor. But if you look at the statute, it deals with concepts that are somewhat broad in their description. So the mayor is the chief administrative official of the city. So that means running the city on a day-to-day basis, making sure things happen, moving things forward, controlling officers and affairs of the city is also specifically described. So that gives you the authority, or the mayor the authority to manage staff, to hire and to fire, to make sure that the city employees are doing what they're supposed to be doing. The council role, and let's just talk personnel, for example. The council's role is to adopt your personnel manual. You just did a new one fairly recently and adopt some changes today. So you establish that personnel manual. Here's our policies. Here's what we're supposed to be doing as employees. Here's the things that we can be subject to discipline for. You adopt that as the council, and then the mayor manages that staff within that personnel manual that you pass. There are a little bit of nuances to that. You have appointed officers, for example, city clerk, city treasurer, city attorney. You can create other appointed offices as well. Those are appointed offices where the mayor makes a recommendation and the council confirms. So you have to have council confirmation for some of those specific positions. But just, I guess, by way of maybe an example. So the mayor supervises and directs department heads and staff on a daily basis. As council members, you don't become involved in the day-to-day operations or, contact, for example, Tom Points and say, Tom, I need you to take the department in this direction, or I need you to work less on this or more on that. That's the role of the mayor. But you do adopt plans that guide how they function. You get to have good discussions about roundabouts or stoplights when you're adopting a particular plan. And then the staff implements that plan. The mayor presides over council meetings and determines the order of business, subject to the rules that the council adopts as far as the council meetings and how they function. I think you guys have a really pretty good process, as I've observed different councils and how they function, where you have the mayor that brings forward the agenda, meets with Council President Haverfield, you go over the agenda, move things around, put things back, and you have that discussion and set that agenda going into it. I think that works pretty well. I've seen a little differences here and there from other entities, but I think you have a pretty good process the way you do it. The mayor breaks the tie. The mayor calls special meetings if needed. The mayor has veto power. And that's something I've never actually seen used. I've certainly seen it by the governor using it in his executive authority, but I haven't seen a mayor use that. It's possible, but that can be overridden by the council, again, by a majority vote if that ultimately happens. The mayor oversees the order. As I said, the policies and sees that the policies and city ordinances are enforced. Those are police powers, essentially, that are enumerated under Title 50, additionally 56606. The mayor also brings forward recommended actions for the council as far as policies, proposed ordinances, but you also have the ability to bring those forward as a legislative branch. But the mayor oversees the police powers as far as health, safety, and welfare and enforcement of ordinances and laws. And then the council has the ability to grant, in addition to the statute, as long as you're not contrary to state statute, additional powers to the mayor. One that comes to my mind may be the procurement policy. If you decide, okay, we're not going to deal with contracts below $50,000 at the council level, or whatever it is you set. Normally, contracts have to be approved by the council, but you can adopt a policy that says we're going to give the executive branch authority to deal with contracts at this level or of this type. So I think I'll cover city council roles and responsibilities, and then let's see if you have any questions on those specific things. So the city council, as I said, is the legislative authority for the city. So that means you adopt the directives and policies that are more broad, that cover the city, the ordinances, the policies, the budget appropriation that folks operate within. Particularly some of those that you deal with, your zoning ordinance, your sewer and water ordinances, you establish fees, the personnel manual, purchasing policies, noise ordinance, animal control, all of those things are your purview. As far as the budget, that's the other main responsibility that you have as council members, is to decide how taxpayer funds are used. The mayor and finance, Doug, bring forward a budget. I'm sorry, Natalie, I need to look over at you while I talk as well. Bring forward a budget, but you go through those budget hearings and you make the decision on how those budget funds are spent as you approve that budget, and ultimately approve the tax levy. You also, in that process or otherwise, have the opportunity to decide what services the city provides, in the sense that in approving that budget, you're going to have engineering staff versus contracting engineering out that some of the smaller cities may do. So you have that ability to decide those services, and you approve positions and staffing levels. But once that's approved, you don't manage those, as a council, those individual employees. You have the authority to annex and de-annex, bring property into the city, take property out. You also set the regular meeting schedule for the council. That's by ordinance. You can also call, three of you can call a special meeting. If you don't feel like a meeting is being put forward, you can call one. You control, as the city council, executive sessions. So those are a meeting of the city council. And there's a specific process we'll talk about later to do that. But those are your meetings to talk about things that the council needs to deal with in a confidential environment. You grant and revoke licenses. And I'm going to talk a little more about this later, but you sit as a quasi-judicial body. So the whole separation of powers, there's a little bit of a blending there where you sit in a quasi-judicial capacity. And that's one where you consider testimony and evidence, you weigh that testimony and evidence and make a decision. But you also pass the criteria that you use to evaluate that, that being your zoning ordinance and your comprehensive plan. Quasi-judicial proceedings are a different standard than your normal legislative political process where you may just have an opinion. I think it's a good idea to, for example, have a noise ordinance at this level or allow so many pets per household. But with a zoning ordinance and a comprehensive plan, you set criteria that you have to operate within. It's not really about your personal opinion. It's about your evaluation of the evidence in that criteria and deciding whether somebody meets that criteria that you set in advance. So those are kind of the main points of council-mayor relationships and inner workings. Do you guys have any particular questions there?
Mayor Kling?
Yes.
Todd, one of my main concerns let's talk about executive sessions,
Okay.
that we don't make decisions on what's involved in those sessions, but I believe that we're not focusing on the real issue here in our sessions, and that is when we get a packet of 400 pages or 100 pages and they're given to us immediately right before the process starts. How can we look at that and understand what's in those documents, and either, even though we don't make decisions, we give kind of somewhat of a direction? Is there a process that we can have those sent to us prior to the executive session so we can study those issues?
So, yes, the issue with executive session is that it's confidential. You all know that. We don't want it to be subject to a public records request if it's something that you want to talk about in executive session. The best way to protect that kind of information that's going out is to, if it's sent out, that I be involved. As your attorney, you can have attorney-client privilege communications. The safest way is to have that information presented in executive session to put it out and to collect it back in that session, so there's less risk of that. But I can communicate with you as attorney-client privileged information to deal with those kind of things. Particularly if it's, for example, really time sensitive, you need to make a decision really quickly, and you don't have the ability to go in and look at something in executive session, think about it, ponder it, and maybe do another executive session or another special meeting later. But Councilmember Rodriguez, that's how I'd suggest you deal with it. You kind of deal with it as you can on a case-by-case basis.
So my question would be to the mayor then, and to the fellow council. Would you prefer that we work through, number one, we get the documents prior to the executive session through Todd, or would you still want to continue just the way we are now?
I could say something. So typically, it would be very, very rare that we would have even 100 pages in an executive session. Typically, it's just a couple pages. What's important, I think, many times is the staff report that is accompanying those documents. Well, I'm sorry, this one's on. Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
Thank you, though. Thank you. Hopefully
There
you
you go.
can hear. Yeah. It's all right. So sometimes it's the staff report that accompanies the documents, because the documents alone, it takes a little bit more than just getting the documents. So I think it would have to be on a case-by-case basis would be my recommendation, depending on what we have that comes forward. I understand what you're saying. And I was going to make a comment, and it would apply to this. When it comes to my role as mayor, as it relates to ordinances and the decisions the council's making, one of the things that I feel is my responsibility, and I've tried to do a good job of this, and that is to ensure that the staff report that comes to you provides you good information and that they're well-crafted so you can make good decisions. because it's difficult sometimes to know what the right decision is on a given topic. And the only way you can do that is if you have information that is succinct, well formatted, that you feel like you have good information. I just want you to know that if we need to make changes or do something differently, and we have been tweaking continually, and I feel like our planning and zoning presentations I love where they've gone over the last 4 years. But if there's any improvements that need to be made, let me know, because we will continue to work on that, because it's just important that you have good information, which speaks to what you're speaking to, Victor. But I think it has to be on a case-by-case
Yeah,
basis
no,
due to
I
the
agree
nature.
with that, Mayor. I mean, there's some things that's a no-brainer, yes, I know. But there's some things that I could bring up right now, but I'm not going to. But it just, that happens 4, 5, 10 years ago, that we're having to make decisions now, and, I mean, or give a direction. So, yes, Mayor, I think that's a better idea.
I appreciate the comment, because that helps prompt me to be mindful when we're looking at executive sessions, what has enough information in it that maybe you should get in advance, and then Todd and I can work on that
Okay.
and figure it out. I thank you for mentioning it.
Mayor, if I may, just clarification, what I heard from Todd also, on the rare occasion that if we feel like we have not had enough information to review, we can call a second executive session on that same subject matter, correct? Is that what I heard from you?
Mayor and Councilmember Bruner, yes. You have the ability to call a special meeting like you did today. That requires 24-hour notice. If it's only an executive session meeting, it's the same 24-hour.
24 hours.
Yep.
Mayor?
Yes.
And great segue into my question. I was going to ask, as far as as council members, are you going to speak later as far as on the individual liability we have? As an example, something that's disclosed that's meant to be confidential. We have obligations as far as to make sure that there is, that we are quiet on certain things. Something that's in executive session is meant to be that, to give that confidentiality to the subject or to the purchase of a piece of property or whatever it might be. Are you going to be speaking about the individual liability we have as a council member, the corporate liability we share as a council on the decisions that we're making, protections that we have? That's that unspoken thing that I think about a lot as far as in my business, but it's not really spoken about much at this.
Sure. Mayor and Councilmember Haverfield, I'm happy to talk about that now. I just hadn't got a specific point in the slide, but you bring up a good point, and I'll emphasize it again. Executive sessions, it's kind of like Las Vegas. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. You're supposed to keep confidential what is said in executive session and the things that you deal with. You've decided as a collective body that that's something you need to keep confidential. I'll talk a little bit more about some things are more permissive than they are required as far as going into that. But as an entity, as a city entity, we're governed under the Tort Claims Act. We have, which limits government liability for discretionary functions, provides protections to the city. And then ICRIMP, we also have insurance that covers that covers you. You may be named in a particular lawsuit as an individual as well as a council member. And as long as you're acting within the course and scope of your duties and responsibilities, then you're covered there by our policy and by the Tort Claims Act that helps provide that protection. Where you may become personally liable is if you violate individually that responsibility, your roles, your legal abilities and powers. So, for example, if one of you, just decided to maybe engage in some kind of illegal drug dealing while you're, in office, or some kind of, specific discrimination or some kind of criminal contact with an employee, those kind of things would not necessarily be covered by our insurance policy and by your Tort Claims Act because you're acting outside the course and scope of your duty. You're engaging in criminal type activity. If you talk about things that are outside the executive session, that could potentially expose you to liability. One example would be a personnel matter, for example. Those are generally things that the legal counsel says we got to talk about those in executive session because people's privacy is involved. There's facts, there's pros and cons to every decision. You wouldn't want that kind of thing to leak out. That could subject the city to some kind of discrimination or lawsuit, and you could create liability as an individual for the city that might not be covered under your protections if you do that.
Mayor, just as a follow-up, then, there's a line somewhere where as a council member, your involvement, the decisions you're making is covered. And then there's a line there where you become a private citizen and you make decisions that might be based upon information provided to you that you've shared elsewhere. I mean, I can see it's a slippery slope sometimes, and then the allegations, whether they have to be proven or not. But we need the main thing I wanted to hear you say is how careful we need to be as council members that we do not share information that's, especially in executive session, because we can take on a liability that we didn't intend to take on, but we took on because we became across that line of being a private citizen and no longer under protection.
Mayor Klein?
Yep, very good points.
So the meat and potato of this thing is this. If you discuss, well, not necessarily you because you're our attorney. Let's say Chief Huff gives us an executive session issue, and I don't understand it completely. Outside of the executive session, does it allow me to clarify issues that I have on this particular point with Chief Huff?
So I think you can get information. I guess what I would say, Councilmember Rodriguez, is to be very careful there as well.
Okay.
You wouldn't want to communicate via email with Chief Huff on that issue because it's not protected by attorney-client privilege. You could talk to me, and that's the best way, I think, to handle it if you have questions about executive session issues. But again, the safest and the best way is to keep conversations in executive session. And if you need more time, do it in executive session.
Okay, thank you.
As a follow-up to that, what I'm thinking is if it's a policy, an ordinance or something, if it's a personnel issue, there probably should be no discussion between council and staff on personnel issues.
I would agree with that, Mayor.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on mayor and council? Okay. Let's go to open meetings. So I want to get... I think it's worth reading the initial statement under the open meeting law. And that's a portion of it, but it's found, all the open meeting law, public records, all that are now under Title 74 in the state statute. But the initial statement says, the people of the state of Idaho, in creating the instruments of government that serve them, do not yield their sovereignty to the agencies so created. Therefore, the legislature finds and declares that it is the policy of this state that the formation of public policy is public business and shall not be conducted in secret. So that says our default is we conduct city business in the open, and we do city business on the record where people can see and observe. Not necessarily comment, that depends on the type of business that we're conducting. But that's our default. The executive session provisions that are in code are interpreted narrowly by the courts. There's a pretty good list of exceptions that public records are exempt under these certain circumstances. The list of executive session items is not so broad, but we need to construe those very narrowly. If we're not in conformance with those particular specific things, we need to be talking about it on the record in the public forum. Next slide. So just a little description, a reminder again, a meeting is getting together to decide or to deliberate. And a quorum is kind of the key aspect that you really need to be aware of as a council member, and whether something constitutes a meeting that you need to be particularly worried about. Making a decision, that's fairly easy. Doing something that you need to do city business-wise where a quorum is present, that's making a decision. Deliberation's a little looser. That can be just receipt or exchange of information. And that can also define and be part of a meeting. It does not include, however, under the statute, informal or impromptu discussion of a general nature on broad topics that's not pending before the council currently. So in other words, it's okay to go to an AIC conference together and hear discussions about growth or about House Bill 389 or about whatever, and talk about those kind of broad things that may not be a pending matter before the city. And you're all at that same conference or event. But you, again, want to be careful about what you discuss as council members, and if it's of a broad, non-pending nature, okay. But if it's about something that's pending or coming before you, you want to be careful. What we want to avoid is what's called a serial meeting. A serial meeting is where one council member kind of does some lobbying, so to speak, in a legislative context, where you're talking to another council member about an item that's coming up. How are you going to vote? I really need you on my team on this one. How, basically trying to, if you talk to each council member individually and get a decision by how they're going to vote, then you've made a decision before the meeting happens and before the public has an opportunity to see that deliberation. A decision was already made. So that's not appropriate. That can happen or be a concern if you're all on an email string. If you're all on an email string and you're communicating back and forth, essentially you have a quorum. So you want to be careful that you're not deliberating back and forth on pending items on an email chain. If you get an email from staff, a bulk email that says, hey, here's my report for this, or the mayor sends you something, we're going to talk about this, be aware of that and respond individually versus respond in group if it isn't already done that way when it's sent out. That way you aren't engaging in inappropriate discussion about a meeting item. You can always talk to staff. We talked about that a little bit already, but if you have a question on some policy, ordinance, transportation plan, whatever it is that's coming up, you can give staff a call and talk to them if you have questions.
Todd, may I ask you a question?
Sure, Doug.
So one of the things that I've done when we have complex budgeting issues is to grab or assemble meetings with councilors, say 2 at a time, not for making a decision purpose, but to share complex information. Is there anything I need to be avoiding in these meetings that will prevent it from becoming serial?
I think keeping it less than a quorum helps protect you from that, and you're not lobbying for a particular vote or decision. You're providing information to council members, so I think we're okay there.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next slide. Notice requirements. So notice is really about transparency, right, for the citizens. So they know what you're going to be talking about and what kind of decisions you're going to make. And they can decide then whether or not they want to come and they're interested in this discussion that the city council, or this action item that the city council may be considering and taking. So there's 2 types of notice. There's a meeting notice and there's an agenda notice. Most entities combine those 2 things, especially if you have a regular schedule of meetings, which you do. You have a set schedule that's in ordinance. The citizens know when you're going to meet, so typically you post your agendas. The clerks, the mayor takes care of that. A regular meeting is a 48-hour in advance. A special meeting is 24 hours in advance. But your concept there is to adequately inform the public of what you're going to be discussing or acting upon, again, so they can decide whether they want to be present. There's a fairly recent statute that says now you have to classify action items and discussion items on your agendas. So it's not just a general description. It tells the public what you're going to be doing. You have the ability to amend the agenda. You can contact the mayor if there's an issue or something there. If you do it more than 48 hours in advance, before a regular meeting, then you can just amend the agenda and repost it, and it's the same agenda. Same if it's more than 24 hours in advance for a special meeting. If it's less than the 48 or less than the 24, but before you start, then it's posted as an amended agenda, and you have to have a motion at the beginning to approve the amended agenda. You can amend the agenda once you start, but you have to have, unless it's a technical correction, I've seen that occasionally. I haven't seen significant amendments to your agendas as I've been here. But you can add an item to an agenda after you start, but the idea is you're supposed to get those on the agenda before the posting time is there. And if you do that, you have to have a good faith reason that's stated on the record why it wasn't included on the agenda that was posted. And you can't take any action on that item unless it's an emergency. So you need to be cognizant and make sure things that need to be discussed get on the agenda. Okay, questions? No?
Just a quick comment, if you don't mind. And just, I think everybody knows this, but I'll say this for Natalie's sake. I meet with Todd and with Councilman Haverfield as council president the Wednesday before a council meeting on Monday. And all of the action items and agenda items need to be in at that time. So we ask for staff to have them really in by Tuesday. Sometimes they're rolling in Wednesday morning. If council wanted something on the agenda, they should reach out. And just as a reminder, if you send me an email, CC TJ on it, and Rick, if it's a council agenda item that you're asking that could, if we could consider that for the council agenda, but make sure it's in advance, because we do have a Thursday afternoon at 4 is when the council agenda goes out the door. It gets actually posted. And it takes a while for the clerk, it's Nate, to compile, get the PDFs and everything into that agenda. It just isn't just like that. There's a process. And so we try to have supporting documents in, but that's the timeline for agenda submissions, just as a quick FYI. Yeah. Are there any questions about that? Nope. Okay. And Todd, it's already 20 till.
I know, I'm sorry, I'll talk faster.
Sorry. Nope.
Public participation. Some people think public meeting means I get to come and say whatever I want on any agenda item. That's not the case. The citizens have a right to be present and observe, but not a right to comment. You can grant them that right to comment on particular items, but the only time they have a right to comment and be present is for public hearings. Those require input from the community in the decisions that you make. But you can set reasonable time limits. I know you've had this discussion before. There are time limits in your ordinance, and you can ask people to keep to those time limits. You can suggest that they not be repetitive, but technically folks have 3 minutes and they can kind of use it to how they want, and you know how that goes. Based on our time, I think I'm going to skip this. Well, okay, let's just go through it quickly. I want to get you thinking a little bit. So this is an issue spotting thing. Tell me what you see as potential issues here. Councilmember Dunn really wants to approve the upcoming development agreement for the building next to his building downtown. He calls all the fellow council members one-on-one to discuss the project and encourage them to support the application and ask how they're going to vote. During the meeting, Councilmember Flip is asking questions that seem to indicate she may not support the application. Councilmember Dunn sends her several texts during the meeting explaining why she needs to stay on board and support the project. Say that again, Council?
Your mic's not on. Your mic. It's okay.
It's a bad idea. Darrell couldn't hear what I was saying, for sure. There's nothing good about this whole statement.
Great, Councilmember Haverfield. Potential conflicts of interest, a serial meeting. Also, when you're on council, you shouldn't be texting each other. I can't say that legislators don't do that. I try to avoid it. Sorry, mention of a different context, but that's essentially communicating within a public meeting, but not in the public forum. So we shouldn't be texting each other back and forth about things.
Mayor, just a quick comment then. Why at the state level can you guys do that and we can't at this level?
It's a very good question, Randy. The state is not subject to the same open meeting laws that local government is. And I see the purposes for that in some instances. I also scratch my head in some instances. But being a Dillon state, you are subject to the statutes that are put in place.
Never happens at the federal level, so.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Could I ask another question?
Sure.
Just for clarity. If, for council members to be having, if you guys don't mind me saying this, a sidebar at the bench, if somebody's talking, two people are talking to one another, I'm guessing that would fall, it really should be public comment, correct, in the mic discussion versus conversation between each other at the bench.
Mayor, I would
you-
agree with that. I occasionally get a question as an attorney with whoever's sitting next to me and try to respond, but among council members, you should avoid kind of leaning over and whispering to each other about a particular thing. There's a perception issue there. You may be saying, hey, the Chiefs are ahead, or, you know, whatever it is you may be mentioning, but folks see that and they may be wondering what you're talking about. And you should avoid comments on the specific issue amongst yourselves. That should be on the record.
Yeah, thank you.
Next slide, I'll just say if there's an open meeting violation, you have an opportunity to fix it. If something's done in violation of the open meeting law, it's null and void. You can basically acknowledge that, go back and fix it and redo it. Intentional violations can be more problematic and may not be fixable, to avoid penalties anyway. Next slide. So quickly, quasi-judicial hearings. As I mentioned, these are something that are different. And it's hard sometimes for constituents to understand that. They think, and rightly so, I elected you. Therefore, I get to talk to you and you have to talk to me. And in most situations, that's absolutely true. But in a quasi-judicial setting, you are acting as essentially a judge and a jury, kind of all in one. You set the criteria in your ordinance that have to be evaluated. That's the public process. But then each case is individual and specific that you evaluate. And people shouldn't be contacting you and talking to you outside the forum. I always suggest you have a good response to those folks that approach you in the grocery store or want to send you an email or chat with you over the fence in the backyard. Just a good response that says, this is a quasi-judicial hearing. I shouldn't be talking to you outside the record. Please come and put your comments on the record. Send an email to staff if you can't make it. So try to avoid that. It's not, there is a case that says if that happens, you can disclose that on the record. But it's not just, I had a conversation with somebody. It's, I had a conversation with somebody and here's essentially all the things that we talked about. So it's put on the record. But you are creating somewhat of a question in doing that by, well, did you cover everything that was talked about or not? The best, absolute best policy is to not talk to those folks. Just say, I'm sorry, it's a public hearing. Please come to the hearing. Please submit your comments in writing. But I need to respect the process and keep the process on the record in the public hearing.
Mayor, if I may, and just kind of a side note there, my biggest frustration is probably development, public hearings.
That's the, yeah, yep.
And it's not just talking to folks. And I will be the first to admit that I have gone out. If, for instance, Councilman Bauer lives near a development area, he's very familiar. He's familiar with the traffic. He's familiar with the type of housing there, challenges, safety from sidewalks and so on. If I have not been in that area, my bad maybe, but I haven't been in that area in over a year or 2 years, then he has a head start on actually what's happening than what I do. Yes, the staff does a wonderful job putting in their maps and whatever the case is. But I feel for me to make a proper decision, I need to at least go out and view, not talk to individuals, but go out and at least view the site. So if you can clarify right, wrong, or otherwise, and how many times I've been wrong in that.
Okay.
Good question, yeah.
Mayor and Councilmember Bruner, so Darrell, this is an area that is a problem if that happens. We all live in this community. We're familiar with it. We may, as Darrell said, may not have been in a particular area as recently as others, depending on where we live. But the courts have said that a site visit, when something is pending, essentially violates due process, because you're going out there outside of the public forum and gathering information about that. If you're driving by the property as part of your regular business travels, you don't need to avoid that. But the most specific worst case example would be you get the packet, you go out to the site and you walk around and say, okay, well, here's this and where's that. And there's case law out there that says a site visit is a due process violation, and really is almost incurable. If you want to do a site visit, you can, but what it has to be is noticed and agendized like anything else. So that makes it challenging to actually do a site visit. You can ask for more information from staff. If you want an aerial flyover, I don't know if we have drones or a video walking the site, those kind of things, but I would definitely advise Darrell not doing a site visit. There's a very narrow case that if it's so innocuous and the information is absolutely already in the packet, the court may grant an exception, but otherwise it's grounds for appeal and overturning the decision. And I know, I've been there, I know it's hard. It's very tough not to want to see it.
If you visit a site, but you don't disclose to anyone, I just don't see I understand there's legal, but it just seems like that would be like the right thing to do so you can make a better decision for the people.
So, Mayor and Councilmember Bauer, Jacob, I understand wanting to understand the application and the what you have in front of you is definitely a good thing. The difference is, in this case, it's a quasi-judicial proceeding. It's not absolutely judicial, but it's quasi, and gathering information outside of the public process is what violates due process. So if you don't disclose it and nobody finds out about it, then, I guess it kind of is what it is. But I would, again, advise you not to do that. I understand why you want to do it, but the courts are what they are.
I trust you, it just doesn't make sense.
Yep. Amen, brother.
That is extremely difficult. Could we pause just 2 seconds? And
Yep.
so I did lean over and have a quick conversation with Councilwoman Mutchie. She needs to leave. And so I'm going to let her just make a quick comment as she steps out.
Thank you, my apologies. On action item
1.3.
1.3, I have sent some comments to the mayor that she or someone else will read on my behalf. But I do have a 9 o'clock meeting that I have to leave for. I apologize. Thank you for the.
I apologize for going over, Councilmember.
Thank you very much. This is a difficult one regarding not being able to visit, but as I was driving around this weekend, one thing I would like to recommend both to City Council and to Planning and Zoning is that we take time to drive around and really get to know our city, having nothing to do with anything coming up. Literally just drive around and look at our city, look at sidewalks, look at how we have zoned historically, where you see multifamily in the midst of single family, and what does it look like today? And I think it's just a good idea to do that, totally aside from any hearing, so that we're familiar with our city. And I need to do that even more myself. But and I was thinking, there are certain areas of the city I don't spend as much time in. I need to spend more time in those areas just so that I'm really familiar from time to time with the growth, the new development, having nothing to do with any agenda item. Is that okay to do?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, if you're going for your Sunday afternoon drive with whomever, sure.
No?
Mayor, and I would also suggest, if I do it on a daily basis. Actually, I pulled up Google's map last Friday on a project I'm working on just to verify the number of heating units that are on top of an existing building. There is an amazing amount of information available online if you just check into it, whether it's MapQuest, whether it's Google Earth. You can pull up and actually go ground level and see 3D images of these buildings. So the information's available. Not everyone's aware of it. I am, because of the business I'm in. So
And so that's just, it's available as well.
Are we allowed to do that?
So I wouldn't do that as far as a pending application, but hey, how's this area developing? We're looking at economic development or incentives or something like that. Great. But if it's a land use hearing, I wouldn't gather information on your own outside the hearing.
So just viewing it online is an issue?
I would think so still, Councilmember Haverfield. I would advise, if you want to have a view of the building, again, staff should and could provide that, especially if you're in a council meeting and they have access to maybe a Google Earth and could do a screenshot or something that goes into the record. Great. But I wouldn't go research and gather information on your own on a specific case.
Mayor, at least our past public hearings, that I think we always hear traffic. So what can staff do? I mean, can they go out there and count cars for 4 hours one day? I mean, it seems like I hate to have their time out there. I mean, the thing is, we're trusting, and sometimes say, well, there's not enough for a traffic study to be done. So but we're hearing from citizen after citizen, traffic, I'm stalled here for 20 minutes, safety, whatever the case is. So how can staff help us then with that if we're not out doing that ourselves?
I think that's a really good question. And so many times they do have the traffic studies that have to be done, and they report on what has to be done, what doesn't have to be done. But I agree with you on the traffic. So Cliff, I appreciate you being here as you work with the planning and zoning team in these presentations. And so I think that's a discussion. Let's talk about how can we better discuss traffic, because it's a constant comment that comes forward.
So just then as a follow-up, we have computers that have internet access, and during our council meetings, I'll quite often pull up whether it's a comp plan that I can zoom in and out of, or even online, I can do the same thing where I can pull up a more recent image. That's during the hearing itself. It's not a part of public record, but it's available to anyone that opens up and does the same thing I'm doing, because it gives me more information necessary to help me make a valid decision. So is that wrong then as well?
I think you could do that. You can certainly look at your ordinances, your comprehensive plan, all those things that are adopted by the city that are outside the staff report that the staff is trying to summarize when it's there. If you have a more recent image or something that you're looking at that's online, I think the best way to handle that is, hey, I'm looking at this new image. Can we put this, it's more recent, put it in the record so the public can also look at it and go, well, yeah, that's a year old, but there's even more of this or that there.
Or just disclose what's on the screen, what's available for anyone to look at, so that it's on public record at that point.
And if you're looking at it, I would, if it's possible, I don't know technologically, Mark, or somebody may be able to answer this, or staff, but get an image of it in the record so the public can also see what you're looking at, and that gives them the opportunity to respond to what you're looking at.
Which we are able to do now with the Teams calls. We can actually do that.
Yep.
From our laptops as well.
Right. You'd have to probably join via Teams and then share. But I tell you what I'd like to do. We don't have time today, but I'd like for council to reach out regarding how any tweaks you want to our reports. And because I have some thoughts, but I don't really want to go into it at length. And I'd run it by you, Todd, in what really has to be shared that's in our packet already versus what we need to see, right? Because sometimes we don't need the repetitiveness of something we already know. So I would love to maybe have a conversation with staff, and you could actually reach out to Cliff so it's not a serial meeting, but just to say, this would help me as an individual council member move more quickly through the process and give me the best information. Is that okay?
Do we add doodles? Do we add doodles to our, that'd be fun.
To add doodles to our,
Get Nathan to do something.
could I want to pause and ask a quick question. How many of you can stay till 9:30? 9:30?
I can cut off earlier and we can, whatever you need to do, Mayor.
Are you able to
another
stay?
day.
Okay, so I think everyone here can stay. We'll try to move quickly, but it's important that we get through item 1, 2, and 1, 3 also. So thank you guys for your willingness to stay so that we can go ahead and finish this.
So Mayor, maybe a hard stop for me at like 9:15 or
9:10 if we can get there.
9:10? Okay,
Yep.
sure. And if there's things that I don't get to, we can do another one.
Okay.
Or another day. One thing I want to particularly mention in regard to these quasi-judicial hearings, they're often controversial, well, periodically controversial. I do see some that you guys are blessed with not having a lot of controversy and able to get through. But folks talk about them, particularly on social media. You've got that whole Nextdoor, in addition to Facebook and others, that people are talking about land use hearings. And for the same reasons that we just talked about, I would say stay off of those things when it's a pending case that's before you. You're getting information outside of the public hearing, again, if you do that. It's akin to somebody talking to you over the fence about the process. And, I wouldn't participate in those kind of things as well, some kind of response, have the opportunities to respond to those posts. You don't want to create, you want to keep that impartial approach to any land use hearing. So you can judge both sides fairly. If you're engaging with one particular side, then the other side could claim bias and again have a potential due process issue with you on a land use case.
Mayor? And Todd, if I might, and even after a case is decided here, isn't there still the 21-day appeal process? So we still need to not be talking about it?
Madam Mayor and Councilmember Levi, 28 days, yes. So I wouldn't engage on those things until after that appeal period's run. They do have to ask for reconsideration within 14 days to be able to pursue an appeal on most things. There's like recording errors and a couple others that are outside of that, but yes, I'd wait till the appeal period runs or the reconsideration period runs before you talk to folks about your vote or however it went down.
So with that, if there was a disagreement of a council member based on the vote, they voted no, it would be what I think I'm hearing you say, very inappropriate for them to speak to someone and say, I didn't agree with it and whatever, that for the council member to talk directly to them about that. Would that be correct?
I would avoid that. Again, it may come up on appeal. If it comes up on appeal or reconsideration, you have to and you decide to rehear the matter. Again, those could be conversations related to that particular application. Okay. So I think Sandy brings up a good point. Until it's done, try to stay out of that fray. One quick comment, we've talked about it before, but as I said, you set the criteria in your ordinance and your comp plan. Your comprehensive plan is not a guarantee, but it's a strong guide. So you really want to make sure that your comp plan reflects what you want to happen in the city. It gives people predictability, both from the public and from the development community. Here's what the city is generally expecting to happen here. And if you do something different, again, it's not a guarantee in a comp plan, but it kind of makes folks go, I was thinking this, and this is what the city passed for its plan. Why aren't we doing this? And again, it's not a guarantee, but just an encouragement to make sure your comp plan reflects what you want it to reflect. And I've been through those processes. Sometimes it's a big, massive, comprehensive process, and it's hard to dig into maybe details on a particular map. But that's the kind of thing that you deal with once you pass it. What does the map say? Let's see. We talked about executive session already. I would just add that some of those things are permissive and not required. So an example would be if you're interested in purchasing a piece of real property not owned by a public entity, you have the ability to talk about that in executive session. The idea being you don't want a bunch of people finding out the city's interested in buying it, somebody goes and then the price war starts and the price goes up. But if you're not really worried about that, you can talk about that in open session if you want to. The executive session provisions are not mandates in themselves. But if it's a personnel matter, I'll tell you every day and twice on Sunday, we got to do that in executive session. We don't talk about those things on the public record. Okay? I'll skip the issue spotting. No, it's entertaining. Public records. I'll just hit the high points here. The records, all records are presumed to be a public record in the city forum, and you have to have specific exemptions. And I noticed a typo here from one of my slides from another entity, but people people have the opportunity to get a copy of a public record, and your emails are public records, the documents that you generate are all public records. But there are a list of exceptions, and it's a pretty long list, and you evaluate that with any request that you get. You cannot ask somebody why they're asking for a public record other than to avoid them generating a call list or a mailer list or something to help their marketing business. But you can ask them to clarify. And there are some timelines involved. Next slide. Timelines are typically 3 days and 10 days, but yes. That's my typo, Darrell, sorry. This was a slide that I pulled from a training for. It happens to be the Urban Renewal Agency for the City of Eagle. But yes, there was one there and I found another one further back in there, so apologize for that. Insert city there. You can charge costs to respond to these things after a certain point. If it's over 100 pages or more than 2 hours of staff time, or if you have to engage any redaction, folks only get a certain amount of this stuff for free. Otherwise, the taxpayers are bearing more of a burden than they should. And you can ask them to pay those costs up front. Next slide. As I said, there's quite a few exceptions, personnel matters, confidential information, trade secrets in your economic development world, attorney-client privilege, those kind of things. But generally, a person can get information about themselves, like their own personnel file or those kind of things. Next slide. So ethics in government, I'm just going to skip through most of these because we also still need to talk a little bit about procurement. Basically, if you have a financial interest in something that's before the city, or your family does, or your business does, and when I say family, typically that's defined as second degree of consanguinity. If you need to look up a genealogical chart, you can do that, but basically 2 degrees of relationship is the separation there. So if you feel like you have a potential conflict of interest financially, happy to visit with you about that. That's what I'm here for. And you either disclose and recuse yourself if need to. Don't hire your relatives. I'll just go on that slide. Second degree of consanguinity, again, is there. Quid pro quos, I'll hit that briefly. There are exceptions to, there's a $50 de minimis gift exception, as long as it doesn't create a risk of impartiality. But a quid pro quo is never okay. A quid pro quo means if you do this, I'm going to do that. Here's this $49 gift card. Really need you on this project. Or here's a $5 gift card. I really need you on this project and need you to vote for it. And I'll get it to you as soon as the vote's over. That's a really extreme example, but you should never get any kind of outside compensation for what you do other than what the taxpayers pay you. Okay. Next slide, next slide, next slide.
All right, could we do gifts real quickly? I mean,
Sure.
I know the gifts apply in the mayor's office. Does it also apply to council? No
Yep.
gifts over $50 in value? Is that right? Okay.
Yes, it applies to public officials in your official capacity, but you're also still allowed to be people. If you have somebody, a family member or a colleague or a friend that always gives you a birthday present, or your Christmas gift at work, those kind of normal things are still okay. But the developer, sending you a $75 gift card, just Merry Christmas, but probably want to send that one back. Okay?
So, Mayor, just quickly, and I'm sorry, but campaigning. I mean, we find
Different.
that businesses and whatever, and of course the perception is, well, they give you $1,000 donation for your campaign, so you're probably they're probably counting on a payback sometime or another. So this has nothing to do with that, it's because you're not in office yet, or
It's,
say you're running, you've been in office and just, running for reelection.
so, Mayor and Councilmember Bruner, those are different scenarios covered under different statutes.
Okay,
As
we
a,
can talk about it later.
yeah, you have to disclose those things as part of your sunshine report, so people get to see who's donating. And when folks donate to me, it's always with a thank you very much. Look forward to visiting with you, but there's never a promise of anything with those. They give you a donation because they like your perspective, whether it's on property rights or business or whatever. But they should never expect a specific result as part of a donation. Okay. Quickly on procurement. So purchasing by a government entity, I got 2 minutes left, is typically a public process, a competitive process. But there are exceptions to that. The idea is to try to balance efficiency with an open competitive process that allows different businesses to participate. Typically, if it's less than $50,000, you can do it however you think is appropriate. You've got a good business you want to do business with, you can. But you can also put out the $300 contract for whatever to bid if you want to. I mean, you don't have to put out everything or skip, I should say, the procurement process for less than $50,000 if you don't want to. That's a policy decision when you adopt your policies. There's services and then there's construction. There are exceptions for certain professional services. If it's a professional service, it's exempt. If it's a real property purchase, it's exempt. Insurance is exempt. You do have the ability to do what they call piggyback. And piggybacking is dealing with another government entity or a cooperative purchasing association that's already put it out for a competitive process. And so you can ride on that competitive process. And often it's something or some other entity that's larger than you that may have gotten a better deal for the taxpayers. You can piggyback on a state contract. You're members of certain purchasing cooperatives that let you piggyback on those contracts. So that's a balance between getting the best deal for the taxpayer or wanting to go out and do a competitive process on a particular thing. But that's what a piggyback is. A piggyback doesn't mean there hasn't been a competitive process. There has to have been one for you to be able to piggyback on that.
So
Okay?
Todd,
Yes.
we've got a procurement policy that Doug has been working on, and that procurement policy right now is slated to be on December 20th agenda, but we may, I don't know if we've got a big meeting again on December 20th. But what I'd like to do is when we bring that procurement updated policy for the city forward, and I don't know, Todd, if you've gotten to review that policy. If he hasn't, we probably need,
Yeah, we've got
it's
it.
just been a while.
Okay.
It's been in process for a while.
Yep.
But what I'm thinking is, at that time, I think we could actually go over a little of this in more detail,
Okay.
especially if it's coming up, I think it's on the 20th.
Yes.
And I think that might be good. We were also going to talk about sole source contracts. Was that today?
Yes. I could,
And what I'm thinking is, for time's sake, maybe what we do is we go back and talk about procurement with our procurement policy. Would that be okay?
that'd be great.
I think so, and focus on it, because I think that's important for all of us to understand what the policy is. As we review it, it'll give us a little bit more information. So why don't we put that with the other? Does that sound good?
And Mayor, if
And
you
we'll
need to
talk sole sourced.
if you need to shift that to January, that's fine. It's not ultra critical to have it in December.
Okay. So I'll look at the calendar, just to see if what, the 20th, it's kind of like our last one. We've got a lot of public hearings again, and it has to do with some fee changes and other things, not all zoning issues, but we put about 4 to 6 items we pushed to the 20th from the last council meeting because it was so long, so we may. So I guess my thought is, Todd, thank you. This is a good beginning, but we're not done. And so we'll do procurement around our procurement policy. We'll talk sole sourced contracts around our procurement policy. And I really appreciate the work that Doug has done. And then maybe we can prep for that. We just need to put a little bow around it with time for you to talk and come back. Because I think this is important also for the public. And one reason it's important, because we do have some that question when we go sole sourced versus outsourced on the bids. And so I think it's important that publicly we clarify what our policies are, especially as we adopt them. Does that sound like a plan?
Sounds great.
Do you guys have any questions for?
I would include the term contracts that the city has as well with, it kind of alluded to that on one of those last pages as far as engineers, contractors. So that is defined as well, so that the council knows how the term contract approach works on an annual or semi-annual or whatever basis.
Yep, happy to do that.
Okay.
They are separate and different. Yes, they are.
Okay, so Todd, if you don't mind just staying put though.
Okay.
For our discussion regarding the open comment policy. So, so with that, we're going to move to 1.2 and then we'll move to 1.3. So recently, I did pull the open comments off of the council agenda, both council and mine. And I'd like to have the opportunity to talk about our focus around open comments and what is a best practice as a city. Because many times it isn't that I don't agree with the comments, and I mean, depending on what it is, but the question that I step back and ponder is what is the role of the council? And what is our role at the bench? Because as Todd went over what the role is, sometimes our comments, and it really, this has come to pass more around the pandemic, that I don't know if it would have, but there could be another issue, right? That, I'll just say critical race theory is something that's come up recently, that are school district issues. They're not city council issues. But then what is the role of city council as leaders in the community? And so I've really weighed it and pondered it. What is our role when we're here as far as speaking out from this bench versus using other media opportunities at letters to the editor, et cetera. And then just so that has, I'm not saying one way or the other, I'm just putting that out, and then I would like to hear from Todd on best practices. Lastly, the only other comment I would make is when we spend much time at the beginning of the council meeting in comments regarding issues that are not related to the business of the night, what it does sometimes is it puts us really late and we don't have time for some of the business items, and we step into public hearings. So that's concerning because we have citizens that are sitting here or others that want us to do the business of the city, but it's so late at night. So the other thing we could do is if we choose to do the comments, put our comments at the end rather than at the beginning so that the work of the people can get done. So anyway, that's just food for thought. So I'd like to hear from the council, but I'd also like to hear, Todd, are there any cautions regarding comments from the bench and any liabilities regarding that?
Sure. So I guess the big picture for the council is, you know, you're here to do the city's business, right? To conduct the business of the city and fulfill your responsibilities. And you know, have the opportunity to frame that and decide what that is. You're also elected officials. You have an opportunity to engage your constituency. I think just kind of my general guidance is engaging your constituency is really your individual responsibility or opportunity versus a council-wide opportunity or discussion. You want to be talking about things that, as a council, you may want to take a position on. My guidance, I guess, or concern, I mean, you've done it and you can do it, but with just a flat open comment period, when we talked about open meetings, we talked about transparency. And an open comment period doesn't really provide transparency. It doesn't let the public know what you're going to be talking about or discussing. I think the best way to approach that is if we want to talk about critical race theory or abortion or whatever, that you just say, hey, Mayor, I want to get this on for discussion. We may or may not take an action item. You can talk about it, but put it on the agenda so the public can know you're going to be talking about critical race theory or masks or abortion or whatever as a council. And then you're transparent versus kind of an open comment period that nobody really knows what's going to come up and whether they should be there to watch and see what you have to say. In an open comment period, you're certainly not able to make take any actions because you haven't described it as anything. But that's just kind of my general thought and guidance. It's your decision whether you think it's appropriate for the city to take a stand or take a position on those particular things and whether it's in your lane or not. But those are just my thoughts, Mayor.
I appreciate that. So, Council, what are your thoughts? And yes, Councilman Bauer.
So I kind of gone back and forth, talked with Bruce a little bit and some of the old timers that were on council from way, way back. And I think there used to be council comments way back in the day, and then Bruce came on and they got rid of them, right, to make council shorter. My only concern is if council comments are removed, but we still keep, the public can come speak for 3 minutes. I spoke to Mayor the other day. There's a meeting when a mentor of mine, Lance Thurston, was in the room. A lady came up and said a flat out lie about us, and I didn't have a chance to make a rebuttal, which I would have liked to. So if we're not allowed to make comments, I don't want the public allowed to have 3 minutes to come make a comment about anything. So that's just make it consistent. If we can't, then they can't. If they can, then we should be able to have a rebuttal or have council comments. But I'm okay with making meetings shorter if we just shut off all comments that aren't related to meetings, even the public.
So could we provide response if in that situation, if there is someone that speaks during the 3 minutes, I try not to engage them, right? It's just their opportunity to speak for 3 minutes. How do we deal with that situation that Councilman Bauer has brought up?
So both scenarios raise that same question, transparency question. I don't see council comments as commonly across the board. I do see public comment opportunity more commonly. And I think, the difference is, well, the public doesn't really necessarily understand the process like you do as far as getting something on the agenda. But I think with the open public comment, what you want to be careful of is taking some kind of action on something that they bring up. You all know that if they bring something up, that's something you might put on the agenda, future agenda. The mayor's responded in a couple of instances to comments that were made to correct things. I think that's appropriate, Jacob, if somebody gets up and says something that's just simply false, without engaging in too much back and forth, I think it's okay for you to say, okay, appreciate the comments, but this is incorrect. So that's maybe a balance between the two, or if you want to keep the public comment and still give them an opportunity to talk about something, but don't let them come up and say things that are untrue.
So with that, then, you would acknowledge me and just say, Mayor, could I comment on that, speak on that issue? I think as a council, as a general rule, we don't want to go there. We don't want to be commenting. Otherwise, we're going to get into this back and forth at council meetings, and that's not what the intent is. However, in the extreme cases you're mentioning where something it's just going to be important, as Todd said, to respond, say thank you for your comments, however, so that it doesn't become we don't want a conflict happening between the public and the council. But if it's that extreme and you feel like there is a need to correct it, and I'm sorry, because I haven't given place for much response because we don't want to get into a back and forth with the public on the 3 minutes. Even, yay, thank you, I try to acknowledge them having been here, but say very little. So it sounds like if there is something that is really absolutely not true, and you feel like it's very important to correct it, that you could actually do so. So.
And what you might do to maybe manage that is let them speak their piece, sit down, they're done with their comment, then you can provide your correction without, engaging them too much.
Just catch my eye really fast so that I can make sure that I don't go on to the next person before you've given whoever it is. I'll try to pay attention in case there is something. But let's not use it for general back and forth, right?
Right,
Because we just don't want to get into a,
And
Yeah.
it is something, again, you're not required to have on the agenda. But you try to balance the community that doesn't understand as well the process. But not everybody has an open public comment provision either.
so while we're there, should we continue that? I mean, other than, I've liked the open comment period because people feel like they have an opportunity to communicate to the council.
I like it if they come comment on something that's on the agenda, but if they come and speak and come attack Darrell for his previous comments, and hopefully we won't,
Yeah.
I'm with Darrell, but for example, that situation, it's just like, man, if they can come speak about something that's not on the agenda, then we need a chance to have a rebuttal.
Yeah, I think, again, sometimes as elected officials, we have to take bullets. That people get to say things about us, it's their opinion. But you're also very entitled to correct factual misstatements. If somebody says, if they say, I'll use myself, they think Todd Lakey is a horrible legislator and does things that aren't appropriate, gets comments, has backdoor deals. I correct some of that, but if they just don't like me as a legislator, they're entitled to their opinion. But I don't think you have to sit there and let somebody make a factual misstatement on the record and people think, oh, you're not responding, so it must be true.
Thank you. One thing that, we're not going to have time to get to our council liaison things today, because the next, we're going to go to 1-3. I will say that, I think, Rick, we may put that on January 3rd. We're going to we just may get that done first thing right off the bat. On January 3rd, talk about the council liaison. But one of the things I'd like to have in council comments is a report out on your liaison roles, to where you have an opportunity, at least quarterly, each council member to give a quick update on those committees that they're serving as liaison, so that other council members know what they're doing and what's happening in those things. Because that's one of the things I don't feel like we've done as good a job, and that's me, right, in making sure that the community and other council members really understand what's happening in the various liaison roles that the council members are serving in. Do you
Mayor,
have-
just
yes.
a quick question. The NA on that report meant what? Just NA. No, just what NA meant.
But
Not applicable, and just briefly, 10 seconds. Most of those NAs are referring to certain boards and commissions that have some sort of review component to it. And maybe talking further clarified at another time, like building site design standards and others, where they actually function in sort of a quasi-judicial function, and then the appeal would go before council. So it was just seeking more wisdom on that. And plus, NA, there is no statutory or ordinance requirement that we have a council liaison to anything other than just very few specified.
Okay, so I did not see a lot of openings. It just mainly, we're gonna just
Yeah, and-
confirm who's doing what again, or if there's changes.
No, I think the intent was to list just as a point of reference, FYI, who is currently serving as a liaison, if there is one, but it doesn't mean that it's just perpetual. It was just to share for your information. If you see someone on that list, it's like, hey, I'm open to serving on that too. I think it's just to gather that information and then provide that to the mayor to make a decision, just for practical administrative purposes. So.
Yes, and we will make changes. So just because someone is sitting as the liaison to a committee doesn't mean they'll necessarily continue. I think this is an opportunity for everyone to say that what they're interested in serving in and going from there. So please get with Rick with any other questions, and then we'll come back and talk about it at another meeting.
Mayor Kling?
Yes?
You might clarify, too, that some of those commission assignments are date-specific, so they're appointed for a period of time. So that needs to be a part of the presentation as well.
Absolutely. NDC is one of those. Compass is voted on by council. VRT is voted on by council, so those we don't anticipate necessarily changing. But it's some of the other commissions that, right, yeah. Okay, we'll come back to that. So thank you, Todd. So if we move on to item 1.3, this is to consider, and this actually is an action item, to consider the approval of the resolution that Darrell has brought forth and then authorize us to sign, the mayor to sign it, affirming parental rights and opposing vaccine mandates for children. And that can be done either just as authorizing the mayor to sign or the council members that choose to sign actually signing the resolution. Jean did send an email and ask that I read something, so I'd like to read this very quickly before we take action on this item. Unless, Darrell, do you have anything to share before I do that, since you brought it forth?
No, Mayor, I think I've expressed to you my preference would be, I realize it may not be unanimous from a council standpoint, but that besides your signature, that those who want to put their signature on there as council people, we are allowed to do so.
Thank you. Okay, so Jean's comments are, parental consent is something healthcare providers take very seriously. We have specific workflows and processes and procedures that we follow very closely to ensure appropriate consent has been provided before any care is provided or a vaccine administered. This is no different with COVID-19. My 14-year-old daughter received the COVID vaccine series, and it would have been impossible for her to consent herself. We arrived for a walk-in appointment that included registration, me verifying specific demographic data, including birth date, address, and other patient identifiers. She was then verified in the IRIS system, which is the Immune Registry Information System, and EPIC. I then had to sign a parental consent form, authorize a treatment, HIPAA acknowledgement, and fill out the appropriate vaccination paperwork, all before they could schedule her appointment. I was then provided a fact sheet and had to acknowledge that I understood that there may be associated risk with any vaccination. From there, we sat in the waiting room until we were called back to the patient room, where we were again verified. She then received the vaccination, and we returned to the waiting room, where she was observed for 15 minutes for any potential adverse reaction. This was the exact same process for her second dose, except we had been provided a scheduled date and time to arrive to follow the recommended 4-week spacing for the Pfizer vaccine. All of this was my consented choice. There were multiple process points where I could have decided to forego the vaccine, but again, it was a choice my husband and I made and one my daughter wanted as well. This is my personal experience, and my right to choose was inherent at every step, along with my parental consent required throughout. The code referenced in this resolution specifically addresses a very narrow scope where a minor may consent to testing or treatment without parental consent. A 14-year-old can consent to their own testing or treatment for certain reportable infectious or communicable diseases. Parents are not liable for payment of such care given without a parent's consent. Please note that vaccination is preventable treatment and not for diagnosis or treatment of an infectious disease, so it does not fall within that category of authority for minors aged 14 or older. This code allows for minors aged 14 or older to consent to their own hospitalization for observation, diagnosis, evaluation, and treatment for their own mental condition. The treating facility must notify the parents. I will not support this resolution because I believe it perpetrates a false narrative and implies or suggests that the COVID-19 vaccine is being provided to minors 14 or older without parental consent. This is not accurate, and I think it continues to malign the healthcare providers and sow distrust. All COVID-19 vaccination is provided to minors only with the consent of a parent or guardian, and there is no punitive action in Idaho if a parent chooses not to have their child vaccinated. Again, vaccinations are considered preventative care, so a minor may not consent themselves. It's imperative that we aren't misleading or sowing fear or doubt with our words and actions, and I believe this resolution does just that. So again, this was statements from Councilwoman Jean Munchie.
Mayor, can I have a question for Todd?
Yes.
Todd, there is no such mandates for vaccination of children, correct?
Mayor and Councilmember Rodriguez, correct.
in this state.
And I think the governor's office and the legislators have said that they prohibit that as well, correct?
Correct.
So are we following in line with this resolution?
I mean, there's Madam Mayor and Councilmember Rodriguez, I think there's definitely been statements by the governor and legislative body that vaccines are not mandated, should not be mandated. So in that sense, I think this resolution is a reflection of that. This deals a little more specifically with that code provision that talks about 14-year-olds or older that have been exposed to a disease and being able to consent to treatment. I read that statute that it wouldn't allow, that it would be unlawful for somebody to provide a vaccine for somebody that's 14 and over because it's not treatment, it's prevention. I believe at least some of our local hospitals, our health district interpret it the same way. But I have seen a newspaper article where Central District Health may think something differently. But this is a policy statement from you all. And whether you think this is something that you need to weigh on, that's up to you.
Mayor?
Yes, Councilman Bauer.
So Dara, I'll be signing it and agreeing with it. No one's died from COVID-19, a child in this state, right, Rick? No, I'm not aware of that. I'm pretty confident unless someone can, been one? I know there's been multiple people injured from the vaccine in this state. So there's been more people injured from it than actually injured from COVID. So that's my reasoning. The children seem to be low risk of getting hurt from the disease. And then it comes down to it's a slippery slope. It's happening in other states. People are moving here like crazy from California because I think has California made it mandated?
Mayor and Councilmember Bauer, I'm not sure if they have. It wouldn't shock me if they have, but I don't know for sure.
I mean, I'll just add one thing. The city of New York, as of last week, has 5 to 11-year-olds has been mandated as of January 22nd. And any child 5 to 11 is getting a $100 Visa gift certificate who gets vaccinated. My main thing is, I realize it's not mandated now. I think we have the police chief here just because there's a law or whatever, it doesn't get followed. My wish is for the city of Nampa to put out messaging that, yeah, it's not happening, but we also are totally against anything. And I wish we could put in the word incentivizing too, because I believe that is going on. And that's going on in a lot of cities and a lot of places. And guess what? It eventually gets here. Thanks.
So I think what Councilwoman Mutchie was concerned about, and I do, as I read the beginning of the resolution, it does state that we're concerned that some jurisdictions and providers may interpret the statute to allow minors. And it's very clear by state statute, it is not allowed. Is that correct?
So, Mayor, that's the way I read it. As I said, I think that's the way Southwest District Health interprets it. And it sounds like our local hospitals here do that. As I said, I saw that newspaper article where Central District Health may look at it differently.
Correct.
So I think it's illegal, but there may be some room for interpretation, apparently.
Would it be possible, and this is just a thought, to reword the first paragraph to state that while it is our understanding that state statute does not allow this, that we support that? If we were to adopt this, to say that we support the state statute and reaffirm that no mandates and going on with it be given and that the precautions be given. I'm just thinking because, you know what, I do want to be careful that this is not interpreted, as Jean said, that we are saying that it's happening and accusing someone. So according to what my understanding is, that St. Luke's and St. Alphonsus are not giving vaccines to young people without parental consent. So could we note that we understand locally, but that the city council reaffirms our belief or that we need to adhere to the state statute as it is written, that it's not, I want to support where you're going, Darrell, but at the same time, make sure that we're not accusatory in our opening paragraph.
I think they can though. It's gray. The state statute's gray where a doctor can do it. And in some cases they are.
Mayor and Councilmember Bauer, that's kind of what I was talking about. I read the statute, it comes down to what constitutes treatment. And I read the statute to mean you're exposed to something and you're treating the disease. The vaccine is not to treat the disease, but to prevent the disease. And I at least, I interpret it, and I think the law prohibits it, but as I said, there are others that look at it differently, not just in the COVID sense, but in other vaccination contexts. So there apparently is room for interpretation there, that somebody may look at it differently than we do.
Well, and I think as under 1 and 2, I mean, it clearly states where we are, which is good. Encouraging providers to, more than strongly, it says strongly encourages, and it's exactly right, and I fully support that. So did someone else have a comment? Councilman Haverfield?
I'm 100% for the position statement. I understand what we're trying to accomplish by making a statement as a body and individually. I think it's important that we remember and hold dear the freedoms that we have, and we're not trying to take away anybody's freedoms like Jean's to make a decision as a parent for their child. I don't think that's what the intent was. As long as that's clear. My question though, Todd, is if Central District Health, as an example, were to partner with the Napa School District to provide a small clinic space or whatever in a high school cafeteria or elsewhere, where they would provide the shot as an incentive, they might get their own little personal pan pizza, or it might be a $100 gift certificate, whatever it is that unlawful? So, I mean, is there some teeth that our law enforcement can use to nix that from happening if Central District Health chooses a different position than the state's taken?
Madam Mayor and Councilmember Haverfield, I think this can be a position statement, but I don't think the city can do something that's contrary to state statute to limit something that is provided for in state statute. As I said, I read it to mean that it would be unlawful for somebody to allow a vaccine to somebody that's 14 or older without parental consent. I think incentives, that's a little different, but if it still comes down to the child making that decision at 14 or over, I still look at that as being contrary to the statute. And I look at it as the states passed that regulation. They've regulated that, so the city can't regulate that. You can make a policy statement that we need to comply with the code. We read the code this way. So I don't think the city can prohibit or wade into that arena beyond what's already in state statute. And then we've got the elected school board that makes their decisions, but they also are responsible to comply with statute. And if they offered incentives for parents to come in with their kids to get the vaccine, that's a parental choice and a school board choice, and wouldn't necessarily be contrary, I don't know, to your position as long as the parents are involved in that. So I would be careful in trying to pass a regulation or an ordinance that goes into that field.
Mayor, so could Chief Huff, since he's here, speak to what enforcement limitations he might have?
And could I make a quick comment? We are under Southwest District Health, not Central District
sorry.
Health.
That's
Central District
Monday
Health
morning.
is Ada County. Canyon
Sorry.
County is Southwest District Health, and it's my understanding that Southwest District Health, their position is different than Central. So I don't think Central District Health would even be allowed to come in to our school district Because we're not underneath
My
Central.
intent was Southwest District Health. It was just, it's Monday morning, so
Okay, perfect.
I was just citing a health department.
If they did that, okay.
Sorry, so.
So
can you
you're,
answer
I agree with everything Todd said. I mean, it's an uncharted territory, sitting back there thinking. It's probably more, to put it in perspective, it would be like a 14-year-old kid can't go get a tattoo without parents' consent. Some parents consent with that. A guy can't go to a bar and buy his kid drinks saying, this is my kid, and it's a parental right to let him start drinking before he's 21 years old. So I would say on a situation like that, we wouldn't, I can't see them going to the school district, but if that ever did happen, I don't think we would have the authority as law enforcement, except what's in the state code to stop that. But that would have to go through a whole bunch of court processes and stuff. But I agree with him that I don't believe that it would be the city council's place to, do some sort of a city ordinance that says you're not getting vaccinated here, and that I would have the authority to go actually put the kibosh on that at a school district. I think it's pretty gray area on there, and I think we would be out of bounds doing that.
That's why I'm back to the position statement. It's really what it comes down to. What we feel, what we will state, has no real teeth that we can do anything with other than.
I think it's just an opinion, and this is
Right.
where we stand as a city council at that point. But as far as enforcement action, I don't think there would be anything for the police department.
And Mayor, just say, I knew that from the front end, and talking to Todd, talking to Rick, and so on. There again, it's just, I want to get on the front end of it. Same way with sanctity of life, same way with different things, that we as a city of Napa keep our distinction, and we keep our messaging out there, and I realize not everyone's going to like it, but I just think it's so important that we, rather than always reacting like most institutions do, is after the fact. And so, yeah, Southwest Health District, I have total confidence in them. I have confidence in I shouldn't say totally in our hospital administrations, because it's a therapeutic thing. I could talk all day on that. And they have not allowed treatment, but anyway, I do love our health workers and so on, respect them, but there again, we're different, and we need to keep that distinction. So that's the main messaging. I realize it doesn't have a lot of teeth. Thanks.
Mayor Clay?
Yes.
Yes, Todd, I fully support parental rights with your children. No one has a right to interfere with that. But this is one of the topics that I think we were referring to where we should go as a council. And that does kind of bother me a little bit, because we shouldn't be involved in these decisions, because we're, again, advising the parents they have the right to do something that we shouldn't step on. But, Darrell, I will be supporting this, and I think it's a good thing to show that, but I'm just a little concerned. So are we in the right direction when it comes to guardians and grandparents forcing vaccinations under this resolution?
Mayor and Councilmember Rodriguez, I don't think the resolution goes there. And that's a whole bigger
Yes, it is.
issue. We've got that legislature struggled with that. I've struggled with that personally, the whole faith healing thing, and not allowing medical treatment. But I think this is just focused on our statement that kids shouldn't be vaccinated without parental consent.
Right, okay.
Yep.
So this is an action item, and at this time, we can have discussion if we need to after a motion and a second, but what is the will of the council as we move forward on this? Would you like to add with the opportunity for council to sign? Okay. Thank you.
I'll second that.
And just as a clarification, there will be some modifications to the resolution we saw, wording-wise, per your request?
Actually, at this time, there isn't.
So it'd be as.
It would be as it is presented.
Okay.
Okay. So just a quick comment. I think my only comment is that I want it known, at least from my perspective, this isn't that we distrust our local providers. And so that's my only concern in the language, is that it almost insinuates that there is someone that isn't adhering. But And so I just want to make it clear that our hospitals, my understanding is our hospital institutions are not, that they do require the parental notification and consent. And so this is in no way not respecting our hospitals and the work that's been done. But I do agree with the premise of, as Darrell Bruner has brought forward. So are there any other comments or discussion? Seeing none, roll call.
Bruner,
Yes.
Haverfield,
Yes.
Levi,
Yes.
Rodriguez,
Yes.
and Bauer.
So we have gone through item 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, 1.5. 1.6 is a discussion regarding city council liaison positions. With that one, we touched on briefly, but I'd ask that we all, Natalie, you too, look at the different ones. We're going to review all of those, and then we'll come back and have a discussion on those. And then the procurement discussion, we will come back to the procurement discussion as we approve the procurement policy. Item 1.8, we went through, and 1.9. So with that, I believe we've gone through our agenda today, and I would stand for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.